Um, I feel like, Tana, you have had such a unique background and one where you have just overcome from the very beginning. And when is your memoir coming out?
Comes out in January. It's being published by Thomas Nelson, which surprised me. When they wanted to buy it, they were the most excited about it. They're a Christian publisher. And I'm like, did you read it? Are you sure you read it? Because it's pretty gritty. But they actually really like that. They feel like it will relate to the average person struggling. The idea that all Christians have this perfect life is not real. And so not everybody grew up in a bubble and has a perfect life. And it's more often than not, we don't experience life that way. So,
Right. And I love the tagline of the book. It's how persistence, grit, and faith created a reluctant healer. And when I think of resilience, I think of needing persistence, grit, and faith as all components. And you not only had a really beyond difficult and challenging set of circumstances from your family of origin, but then when you were very young, you were diagnosed with cancer.
yeah.
I just would love to know how you were able to rise above and overcome and create resilience, specifically with the cancer and probably some of the biggest wounds that you were left with. How old were you when you got the cancer diagnosis?
23. And, people often ask me, oh, that's like so terrible. Is that the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And I got to tell you, there's one thing worse than cancer in my life, and that was depression. Mm-hmm. And because the cancer sort of led me down that path to depression, cancer was something that had a clear medical plan, if you will. And depression was just this overwhelming thing that just consumed my life. And that's when I sort of wanted to die. But it started with the cancer. And so, yeah, it was a really tough time in my life. That was a dark time. And it's really interesting because I know because it actually happened to me several more times. I got cancer several more times and had to go through surgery, radiation, the whole thing. But I handled it completely different. So it was very different than the other times that I went through it. That's resilience. So the first time knocked me down pretty hard. I felt like I was fighting this phantom thing that sucker punched me, and I couldn't fight back because I didn't know what it was or where it was, and it just kept knocking me down. And I thought I was going to stay down. Somehow, well, not somehow, by the grace of God, I was able to get up. But it was not easy. And I think because the struggle was so hard, other struggles in my life don't seem that bad now. I mean, they can be pretty bad. And I'm like, oh, not as bad as that. It's not as bad as that. And I just always, compare it to that one thing. And when I went through cancer, subsequently, it was nowhere near that. I handled it completely differently. Had I had the tools back then, it would have been different.
Mm-hmm. I have had 3 bouts of depression, Tana, in my life. And my first one came on about 20 years ago when there was some really difficult situations around my oldest son, Josh. And he was only 13 and had kind of some onset of some mental health challenges. But with all the interventions my husband and I tried and the level of disagreement we had over it, it was just a snowball effect of negativity. It affected our marriage, our finances, for the treatment centers, there was just loss all around. And then I was still trying to manage taking care of 4 kids and all of Megan's care. And they were like in elementary school. But I went from being like a really vibrant person, leading a Bible study. I have run my first marathon, and the next year I could barely get out of bed. I mean, that depression, I just want to say it leveled me. It surprised me how, I ended up getting IBS, but I didn't really even know it was IBS. This was like 20 years ago. I didn't have the mindset tools. I let the IBS go for way too long, and the gut imbalances ultimately really impacted my mood. But I could barely get out of bed. And for me, I just started putting the pieces together little by little. I got a holistic doctor. They started creating better gut balance. I have been running a marathon. I let all exercise go during that thing because I could barely get out of bed. I just started walking around the block. But it was kind of like a building of these puzzle pieces to begin putting my life back together. But I think so many people on this call in this season might have even had a past bout of depression, or maybe a current struggle with it right now. Maybe their experience with the quarantine is more than a quarantine. Maybe it's a loss of a job, or being furloughed, or a lot of anxiety about how to run their company, or any number of other challenges that this season has hold. Since we're talking on depression, can you speak a little bit more into your healing journey around that?
Yeah, that was a really tough time. And that was the one time that I really wanted to die. And I couldn't kill myself because my mom guilt tripped me so badly. I knew she would beat guilt into me into the afterlife. And so, she would die if something ever happened to me. So it was something that kept me from making that final step. But I used to pray every day that it's like, well, why can't something else just take me? And I became so angry at God. It's like, why can't that truck just hit me? Life would be just so much easier. I'm wasting oxygen on the planet. There's no purpose for me being here. And I tried moderately praying because I didn't really know much about praying at the time. God wasn't a big part of my life. And so, interestingly, my dad had been a minister when I was growing up, and that kind of turned me away from God. I had a very difficult relationship with my dad, which is all in my book. And so when I tried praying to God, I was like, if there's a God, he doesn't love me. So why should I love him? I mean, I really had these very dark, awful thoughts. And I thought God had given up on me if he even was there. And so that's hopeless. Because if there's no God, there's nothing else to look forward to, then there's nothing. So there was nothing for me. And so, unfortunately, I found a lot of wrong answers before I found the right answers. My journey was very rocky. I ended up being misprescribed or going on the wrong medication. I was given Prozac. I tried to pull myself out of it. Now, Prozac for the right person is a great drug. For the wrong person, it's a complete disaster. And we know that with our work at the Amen clinics. That's part of when I met my husband and he showed me why Prozac was like completely the wrong drug for me, I was just dumbfounded. And it was the wrong drug for me, and it just about ruined my life. So I went from being this extremely cautious and anxious person to dangerously impulsive. And it was weird. And so from there, but I somehow recognized it, and I pulled myself out of that. And it was through a friend that took me to Saddleback, way back when you guys met in the tent. And it was like, slowly I began to go, wait a second, I'm missing something in my life. And so it took me a while, but it was a rocky road. But I was one of the lucky ones, if you will. God had grace, and pulled me through that. So it was not an easy thing. And I was very angry with God for a long time. And then I finally realized it's not God. So it was always me that walked away.
That's interesting. He was always there with open arms.